The morning sun spread its warm light across Martha's quiet home in Portland. She had lived alone for years now, her life calm but often lonely. That Saturday, she woke up early with one simple goal to clean the guest room that had turned into a storage space of old memories. Boxes filled with family photos, old books, and clothes she no longer wore covered every corner. The air smelled of dust and lemon cleaner, and the sound of her radio filled the silence. Martha, in her early 60s, had short silver hair and a gentle, thoughtful face. Since her husband Tom passed away 5 years earlier, her days had been slow and predictable. Cleaning was her way to fill the quiet. She moved methodically, sorting through boxes, stopping now and then when a picture or keepsake made her heart ache. As she held an old photograph of her and Tom from a beach trip years ago, a bittersweet smile appeared on her face. She whispered, "You'd laugh if you saw this mess, Tom." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was her younger sister Linda, calling from Seattle. "Hey, Martha. How are you doing this morning?" Martha smiled. "Busy? Believe it or not. I'm finally tackling that guest room." Linda chuckled. "About that guest room, I actually have a favor to ask. Ethan's heading your way. His internship starts Monday, but his apartment won't be ready for a week. Can he stay with you for a few days?" The mention of Ethan, her nephew, made Martha pause. She hadn't seen him since he was a teenager. "Of course," she said warmly. "I'd love the company." "Thank you so much," Linda said, relief in her voice. "He really looks up to you, you know. He's grown into such a kind man." After hanging up, Martha looked around the room and felt a spark of energy. It had been so long since she'd had a visitor, especially family. She changed the sheets, opened the window to let in fresh air, and arranged a vase with a single white rose on the nightstand. The small touches made her heart lift. By afternoon, she had everything ready. She showered, dressed in a soft cream sweater, and brewed tea just as the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she almost didn't recognize him. Ethan stood there with a suitcase and camera bag slung over his shoulder. He had grown tall, with dark hair and the same kind eyes she remembered. "Aunt Martha," he said, smiling wide before pulling her into a hug. Martha laughed softly, touched by the warmth in his voice. "Ethan, you look so different. You were still in high school the last time I saw you." He smiled shyly. "And you look just the same. Maybe even better." They both laughed, the words light and genuine. Inside, Martha served tea and cookies as Ethan told her about his internship, a photography position for a travel magazine. He spoke with quiet passion, his voice steady but full of life. She found herself admiring his focus, how he spoke about light angles and capturing emotion through a lens. "It's funny," Ethan said, looking around. "I used to come here as a kid and everything felt huge. Now it feels so peaceful." Martha smiled. "It's quieter now. Maybe too quiet sometimes. But I've learned to enjoy the stillness." They talked for hours about family, travel, and small things that filled the gaps between years apart. Martha was surprised at how easy it felt, how quickly the house seemed alive again. Later, after dinner, they washed dishes together. Ethan insisted on drying, joking that he owed her 4 years of holiday meals. That night, as Martha prepared for bed, she passed by the guest room and peeked in. Ethan was sitting on the bed, laptop open, editing photos. The soft light from the lamp framed his face with focus and calm. Martha smiled quietly and went to her room, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning was calm. The sound of birds filtered through the curtains as Martha dusted her room. She hummed softly to herself, her thoughts light. It felt good to have someone in the house again. She thought about cooking pancakes for breakfast and maybe showing Ethan the old garden that had once been her pride. But just as she began folding a pile of clean clothes, there was a gentle knock on her door. Before she could answer, Ethan stepped inside. He looked hesitant, holding a small photo frame she recognized. Instantly it was from the box of old family pictures she'd left in the hallway. "Sorry, Aunt Martha," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to walk in like that. I was just looking through these pictures." She turned, surprised but not upset. It's all right, honey. Those photos go way back. That one's from the summer your mom and I visited the coast. Ethan smiled faintly, glancing down at the picture. You both looked so happy. I guess I didn't realize how much family moments like that meant until recently. There was a pause soft.com, but filled with something unspoken. He stepped closer, setting the frame on her dresser. His voice was lower now, almost thoughtful. You've always been the kind of person who holds everyone together. I noticed that even as a kid, Artha didn't know what to say. She felt both touched and caught off guard by the sincerity in his words. I just try to be there for people, she said gently. It's what family's for. Ethan nodded, his expression warm but serious. I think that's something rare these days. For a few seconds, silence hung between them. Not uncomfortable, just meaningful. The air carried the soft scent of her lavender candle, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, as if realizing how long he'd been standing there, Ethan smiled lightly and stepped back. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your cleaning. I just wanted to thank you for letting me stay here. It means more than you know. Martha nodded, smiling with genuine affection. Your family, Ethan. You never need to thank me for that. He gave a small nod, his eyes full of quiet gratitude, and left the room, closing the door gently behind him for a long moment. Martha stood still, looking at the photo he'd left on the dresser. Something about that conversation lingered in her mind. It wasn't what he said exactly, it was how he said it. His voice carried emotion, honesty, and a depth that reminded her how human connection could appear in the most ordinary moments. She looked out the window, the morning light soft on her face. Maybe, she thought, this week would bring more than just company. Maybe it would remind her what it felt like to truly be seen again. And as the sound of Ethan's footsteps faded down the hallway, Martha felt something change inside her, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, comforting one. The house no longer felt quite so empty. The following morning started with a quiet rhythm that felt almost peaceful. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen as Martha flipped pancakes on the stove. Sunlight spilled in through the window, painting the counter with a warm glow. She had always loved mornings like this, simple, calm, and steady. For years, she had eaten breakfast alone, the silence almost comforting. But now, hearing footsteps coming down the hall made the house feel alive again. Ethan entered the kitchen, stretching and smiling, his hair slightly messy from sleep. That smells amazing, he said, his voice still groggy but kind. Martha laughed softly. Well, I figured I should make something special. My guest deserves it. He sat down at the table, glancing at the small vase of flowers she'd placed there. You always make things feel warm, he said quietly. Even breakfast feels like a memory here. Martha smiled as she poured him coffee. Maybe that's what happens when you live in the same house for 40 years. Everything starts carrying pieces of the past. Ate together, talking about small things: his internship, her garden, and the town's weekend farmers market. The conversation was easy and natural. But underneath it, Martha sensed a quiet weight in Ethan's tone, something thoughtful and unspoken. She didn't ask yet. Sometimes she'd learned. People revealed their worries when they were ready. After breakfast, Ethan helped her clean up. He dried dishes while she put them away, humming a tune from the radio. It felt so normal, yet somehow precious. When they finished, Martha suggested showing him around the garden. Outside, the late spring air was crisp and fresh. The garden, though smaller than before, still bloomed with roses, lavender, and a few patches of vegetables. Ethan took out his camera, fascinated. You could build a whole story around this, he said, snapping photos. Every plant has its own history. Martha smiled, brushing her hands against the lavender. That's true. I planted this right after your mother moved out. It made the yard feel less empty. Ethan lowered the camera. You've always been strong, haven't you? She chuckled softly. Strong. Maybe just stubborn. Life doesn't stop when it gets hard. You just keep finding reasons to wake up. He looked at her for a moment as if her words meant more than she realized. Then he nodded, quietly taking another picture. That afternoon, the weather turned cloudy. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and they decided to stay in. Martha made tea, and Ethan set up his laptop at the kitchen table, editing photos. She sat across from him, flipping through an old cookbook. The silence was peaceful, filled with soft sounds of rain, the tapping of keys, the whistle of the kettle. After a while, Ethan sighed. Martha looked up. "Tough photos?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "No, just a tough week." He stared at the screen for a moment before continuing. "I broke up with someone before coming here. I didn't want to talk about it, but I guess it's been sitting on my mind." Martha's heart softened. "I'm sorry, dear. Breakups always hurt, no matter how much time passes." He nodded slowly. "It wasn't bad, really. We just wanted different things. But I keep wondering if I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I'm not built for long-term things." Martha reached for her tea, her expression kind. "Ethan, relationships aren't about perfection. They're about trying, even when things don't make sense. You're young, you'll find what fits your heart, not just your plans." Her words seemed to ease him. He gave her a small, grateful smile. "You always know how to say the right thing." She laughed gently. "Comes with years of mistakes and lessons. Believe me, I've said the wrong thing more times than I can count." Ethan chuckled, his shoulders relaxing. "I can't imagine that." They talked a bit longer about life, love, and how people change. Martha found herself surprised by how mature he'd become. The awkward boy she remembered had turned into a thoughtful man, one who listened deeply and spoke with sincerity later in the evening. As the rain continued, they decided to watch an old movie together. Martha chose a classic comedy she and her husband used to love. Ethan made popcorn, and they sat side by side on the couch. The laughter from the film filled the room, mixing with the rain outside. Halfway through, the power flickered and went out. The screen went black, and they both froze for a second before laughing. "Perfect timing," Ethan said, shaking his head. Martha lit a candle and set it on the table. The soft glow filled the room, giving it a calm, almost nostalgic feel. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the rain. "You know," Martha said softly, "I used to hate nights like this. When the lights went out, it made me feel alone. But right now, it doesn't feel that way." Ethan looked at her, his expression gentle. "I'm glad. You deserve company, Aunt Martha. You've given so much of yourself to everyone else." She didn't know how to respond at first. His words felt genuine, not just polite. "Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot," she said finally. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of comfort. They sat like that for a while, the candle flickering between them. Martha felt something stir inside her. Not sadness exactly, but awareness of time passing, of connections that bridged generations, of how love could exist in quiet, unspoken ways. When the lights finally came back, the movie resumed, but neither of them seemed as focused on it. Their hearts were calm, their thoughts full. Before heading to bed, Ethan turned to her. "I'm really glad I came here. I didn't expect to feel this. Grounded." Martha smiled, placing her hand gently over his. "Maybe that's what home does, it steadies you when the world feels too fast." He nodded. "Yeah, I think I needed that more than I knew." That night, Martha lay awake longer than usual. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. She thought about the years that had passed, the loneliness she had accepted, and how in just 2 days something inside her had changed. It wasn't about romance or longing. It was about connection, about seeing someone grow, heal, and remind her of her own strength. She realized that even in her 60s, life still had moments that could surprise her. Moments that whispered that she wasn't done feeling alive. Outside, the rain eased, replaced by the steady hum of night. Martha closed her eyes, feeling grateful for family, for warmth, for second chances at simple happiness. And in the quiet glow of her heart, she knew this week would leave her with memories she'd carry for a long time, memories of comfort, laughter, and the beauty of being seen, even when she least expected it. The next morning, Martha woke up earlier than usual. The air outside was cool, and faint sunlight touched the curtains. She made her way to the kitchen quietly, not wanting to wake Ethan. The house smelled of rain and coffee, her favorite kind of morning. As she poured herself a cup, she glanced out the window and saw the small garden still glistening with dew. Everything looked peaceful, yet something inside her felt unsettled. Like a question waiting to be answered, Ethan soon walked in, his hair messy and his eyes tired but kind. "Morning, Aunt Martha," he said with a sleepy smile. She smiled back and handed him a cup of coffee. They sat down together at the kitchen table. It's the same spot where they had shared so many quiet talks in the last few days. After a few minutes of silence, Ethan spoke. "I had a dream last night," he said, "about Uncle James." Martha's hands paused around her mug. Her late husband had passed away nearly 10 years ago, but hearing his name still brought a soft ache to her chest. "What kind of dream?" she asked gently. Ethan stared into his cup. He was sitting right here at this table. He looked at me and said, "Take care of her." Then he was gone. Martha felt her throat tighten. The words hit deeper than she expected. For a moment she didn't know what to say. Then she smiled faintly. He always had a way of saying exactly what mattered. Ethan looked up at her. I think he meant more than just helping around the house. She raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then spoke slowly. "You've been so strong for so long, Aunt Martha. Everyone relies on you, but I think sometimes you forget to rely on anyone else. You do everything alone. Cook, fix things, manage the house. You shouldn't have to." His words were gentle but sincere, and they made her chest ache with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She had never thought about it that way. She'd grown used to independence, almost as if it were armor. "You sound just like him," she said softly. "James used to tell me the same thing, that I didn't always have to be the strong one." Ethan smiled. Then maybe he sent me a reminder. The rest of the morning passed with light chores and quiet conversation. They cooked together again, cleaned the living room, and shared stories about family. Ethan found old photo albums in the drawer and opened them eagerly. The pictures showed Martha and James in their younger years, smiling on road trips and standing proudly beside the house when it was newly built. "You two looked so happy," Ethan said. Flipping through the pages, Martha nodded, her eyes tracing the photographs. "We were not perfect, but happy. We built this life from almost nothing." She paused for a moment. "When he passed, I thought all that color in my world disappeared. But lately, I'm realizing maybe it's still here, just softer." Ethan listened, his eyes warm. "I think he'd be proud of you." "I know I am." Those words stayed with her for the rest of the day. She hadn't expected them to affect her so deeply. As afternoon turned to evening, she found herself sitting outside with a cup of tea, thinking about the years she had spent alone. Ethan joined her quietly, the sky glowing pink and gold above them. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked suddenly. She looked at him in surprise. "Leaving? No, not really." "Why?" He shrugged. "It's just sometimes staying in the same place too long makes you forget there's still more life to live. Maybe you could visit Mom in Chicago or travel somewhere new." Martha smiled, though her heart tightened slightly. "I've thought about it, but I don't know if I'd fit anywhere else. This house holds too much of my life." Ethan looked thoughtful. "Maybe, or maybe it's holding you back." His words lingered long after he went inside. She sat under the fading light, watching the shadows stretch across the yard. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if she was holding herself back, living quietly out of comfort, not out of choice. Later that night, after dinner, they watched another movie. But this time, Ethan seemed quieter, distracted even. When the credits rolled, he turned to her with an expression that looked both nervous and determined. "Aunt Martha," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Of course." He hesitated before speaking. "Would you ever consider selling this place? Maybe moving somewhere closer to family or even to the city?" The question caught her off guard. She put down her tea. "That's a big change, Ethan. This is home." "I know," he said quickly. And it always will be. But I just think you deserve more than just these walls. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. Maybe it's time to do something for yourself." Martha stared at him for a moment, feeling a strange mix of surprise, pride, and emotion she couldn't quite name. No one had ever said that to her before. "You really think I should leave?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Not leave to start something new. You've still got time, Aunt Martha. Life doesn't end at 60. She let out a small laugh, touched by his sincerity. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But sometimes the hardest things are the ones worth doing." The words sank deep into her heart. For years, she had buried her own desires beneath routines and responsibilities. Now, hearing them reflected back in Ethan's voice, she realized how much she had been waiting for permission, for courage. Maybe for someone to remind her that it was okay to dream again. The clock ticked softly as they sat there in the dim light. Martha finally said, "You might be right. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for life to happen and just live it." Ethan grinned. That's exactly what Uncle James would have wanted. Martha looked out the window where rain had begun to fall again, soft and rhythmic. "Maybe so," she whispered. That night, long after Ethan went to bed, she stayed up at the kitchen table, sketching ideas on a notepad, places she wanted to visit, things she wanted to learn, people she wanted to reconnect with. It felt strange but good, like she was remembering a part of herself she had forgotten. When she finally went to bed, she felt lighter, almost excited about what might come next. The house, once quiet and heavy, now felt filled with possibility. And though she didn't say it aloud, she knew one thing for sure: her nephew hadn't just come for a visit. He had reminded her that life still had chapters left to be written. The next morning, Martha woke up with a strange burst of energy she hadn't felt in years. The house felt brighter, the air lighter. She made breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee, and hummed softly as she worked. When Ethan came downstairs, still half asleep, he stopped in surprise. "You're up early," he said, smiling. "I have a lot on my mind," she replied with a grin, "and I think it's time to start making some changes." He sat down across from her, curious. "What kind of changes?" Martha slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "My list," she said proudly. "Things I want to do before the year ends." Ethan unfolded it and read aloud, his eyebrows lifting with each line. "Travel to the coast. Take a painting class. Visit Sarah in Chicago. Fix the old garden. And number 5, learn to dance again." He looked up, laughing. "That's quite a list," she chuckled. "Well, I figure if not now, then when?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly touched. "I love this. You're really doing it." Martha smiled, her eyes warm. "Thanks to you, I realized I've been waiting too long for life to feel new again." That day, they spent hours going through her closet, sorting clothes she hadn't worn in years. Old coats, shoes, even her husband's fishing hat, it all carried memories. At first, it felt heavy letting go, but the more she did, the freer she felt. By afternoon, there were boxes ready for donation and laughter echoing through the house as they worked. Ethan found an old photograph tucked between books, a picture of Martha and James on their anniversary. She was in a red dress, smiling brightly as James spun her around on the dance floor. Ethan handed it to her gently. "You looked so happy that night." She took a deep breath, holding the picture close. "That was the last time we danced together," she said softly. "He always said I had terrible rhythm, but he didn't care." Ethan smiled. "Then maybe it's time you danced again for him." That night, after dinner, Martha stood by the window watching the sunset fade into gold and purple. Ethan joined her quietly. "You know," he said, "there's a small dance class in town. I checked earlier. They meet on Thursdays." She looked at him, surprised. "You're serious?" "Completely," he said with a grin. "And I already called them. They have one open spot, if you want it." Martha laughed, shaking her head. "You're not giving me a choice, are you?" "Nope," he said. "You're doing it." For a moment, she hesitated, then smiled. "All right, then. I'll go." When Thursday came, Martha stood outside the small community hall, feeling both nervous and excited. Ethan had driven her there, offering encouragement the whole way. The sound of soft music drifted from inside. She took a deep breath and stepped in. The instructor, a kind woman around her age, welcomed her warmly. By the end of the first class, Martha's cheeks hurt from smiling. She wasn't perfect, not even close, but it didn't matter. She was laughing, moving, alive. When she got home that night, Ethan was waiting up for her. "So?" he asked eagerly. She dropped her bag and laughed. "I did it. And I didn't even fall once." He grinned. "I'm proud of you, Aunt Martha." Days passed quickly after that. Martha started going to class twice a week, meeting new people, and even making friends. She planted fresh flowers in her garden, painted again, and began planning a short trip to visit her sister in Chicago. Every evening, she and Ethan would sit together, talking about life, dreams, and the future. But one evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Ethan grew quiet. "Aunt Martha," he began, "I've been thinking. I might have to go back to the city soon. My job needs me." She nodded, trying to hide the sadness in her eyes. "Of course you should. You have your own life to live." He looked at her with affection. "I just don't want you to feel alone again." She smiled softly. "You've already changed that. I'll miss you, but I'll be okay now. You reminded me that life doesn't end when we lose someone, it just changes shape." When the day came for Ethan to leave, the house felt different again, but not empty this time. She hugged him tightly at the door. "You take care of yourself," she said. "I will," he replied. "And you promise to keep living, okay?" "I promise," she whispered. After he left, Martha stood by the window watching his car disappear down the road. The silence felt heavy for a moment, but then she looked around the house, fresh flowers on the table, paintbrushes by the window, a dance flyer on the fridge, and she smiled. Life was still here, waiting for her. Weeks turned into months, and Martha kept her promise. She traveled to Chicago, reconnected with old friends, and even held a small art show at the local library. Each day she discovered something new about herself. She wasn't just someone's wife or aunt, she was Martha, a woman who had learned to live again. One evening, she received a letter from Ethan. Inside was a photo of him standing by a city fountain, smiling. On the back he had written, "Keep dancing. You're my hero." She placed the letter on the shelf beside her husband's photo. The two pictures, one of the past, one of the present, sat side by side, both filled with love. As the night sky darkened outside, Martha turned on the radio. A soft song began to play, the same one she had danced to years ago with James. She stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and began to sway to the music. Alone but content. In that moment, she wasn't lonely. She felt every heartbeat of her life, every joy, every loss, every second of courage that had brought her here. The woman who once lived in quiet routine was now alive again. Not because of someone else, but because she had chosen to be. And as the last notes faded, she whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Ethan, for reminding me who I am." The wind outside brushed softly against the window, almost as if the house itself was breathing with her. Martha smiled, knowing her story wasn't ending, it was just beginning again.